Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. All right. So there is a slight change within the sutta that we are going to do today, but I am going to cover the sutta that that I have put up on the website. It is a mistake on my part because I have put a version or a different sutta with the same name, right? So, but we are going to cover that sutta. It is a short sutta. We can cover that sutta. But I was hoping to do another sutta on directed and undirected meditations, right? Which falls very much in line with what we have been doing for the past, I think 2 weeks or so, 2 weeks or so with the sutra classes. So let us cover the first sutta. So if you do have the first sutta with you, right? Certain parts which I explained within the Bhikkhuni Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, which is a sutta that I have put on my website, or the Dhamma Center website. Certain parts of the sutta does repeat itself, right? So we are going to go down to the main points of the sutta, right? I'm hoping we could spend about 20 to 30 minutes on this sutta and then move on to the other sutta, which I was truly intending to sort of expound to you, right? All right. So may I just have a show of thumbs up emojis if you've read the sutta already, please. You can even do this if you read it. All right, okay. So just a few. Okay, so just a few. Okay. So okay. All right. So now both of these suttas, right? Both of these suttas, now it specifically speaks about um, um, admonition of Dhamma, or rather, not an admonition, but more of a sort of a Ananda's congratulations given to the bhikkhunis, the nuns, with regard to the practice that they were doing on their own personally with regards to the meditation and specifically vipassana, or insight meditation, right? So these two suttas, or the sutta that we are specifically going to do next, they are quite important in a way to sort of understand how the bhikkhunis sort of strived for nibbana, or strived for spiritual attainments or attainment of sainthood, which is not very, and these are also not suttas that specifically are talked a lot about. Um, the reason not being anything to do with the bhikkhunis per se, but more to say that, you know, there are more sort of suttas and with valiant Dhamma expositions within many of the other suttas as well. But I feel like the second sutta that we are going to be doing on directed and undirected techniques is it's a very important sutta in integrating lay life, mundane chores, duties, responsibilities, and the importance of those chores, duties, responsibilities with regard to the spiritual path of practice, and um, how it could support our practice really, and how repeated practice in terms of vipassana could sort of also bring a moody, or not a moody, but rather the word which is used is a sluggish mind. That's the word that is used in the Pali, a sluggish mind. And it is really true. But we will be going into those details after. So with regards to this Bhikkhuni Sutta that I have published, or rather I have uploaded onto the website, it is a conversation of Venerable Ananda walking into the nuns' quarters, the nuns' quarters being usually, it is quite nice to understand the relationship that the monks would have with the nuns, right? So there are a lot of juicy details, which is quite interesting, I think. Now, juicy details in a very wholesome way, mind you, right? So the nuns would of course dwell not within the monks' monastery, but the nuns would always be within the vicinity of the monks, right? Of the male monks. This specifically is because one thing is because of protection, right? Protection. Because now when the Buddha would be traveling, if the nuns are to follow, the nuns being females, they faced rather a bit more challenges compared to the monks. They are unable to sort of live in a jungle wholly secluded on their own, right? Because those days within the jungles, the forests were places that robbers, bandits, and all of these people used to sort of hide in, right? And the monks would also be in sort of, if you have heard the term Andavanaya, which is the dark forest. Now, even the term Andavanaya is quite, it gives us a bit of a feel of, a scary forest. And it was really a scary forest indeed, because there are many sort of sutras which have been taught within these areas where it is expounded, like for example the expounding of the Metta Sutta, where the Metta Sutta was expounded to help a couple of monks deal with the hindrances that they had come to face whilst living in a sort of Andavanaya or a dark forest with the inhuman forces, evil forces that were residing in the forest with the monks, right? And this is quite true. Now, even whilst I was residing, or when we would usually speak, I was questioned about this the other day. The monks would usually be trained in Sri Lankan culture to not use the word I. So we say we, right? We, in a way, to refer to the Panchapadanaskandha, the five aggregates of clinging. So the white people here, or when you speak to people who've grown up here, the Sri Lankans, I think, who understood Sri Lankan culture understand that fact. But I was questioned, who is this we you're talking about, Manta? You live alone. Right? So the we is the Panchapadanaskandha. Where was I? Okay. This happens. All right. So with regards to when we were residing in places like the Pauk monastery, or another couple of monasteries around the world, there would, in certain monasteries, we would have these forces at play. These forces at play. And it would be very important to understand or to know how to deal with these forces when you are trying to develop a spiritual practice, right? So also, now these suttas, like the Bhikkhuni Sutta and the other sutta, the Bhikkhuni Vasaka Sutta that we are going to be doing next, these suttas are important to sort of give credit to the nuns as well. The nuns did not have it easy, mind you. Right? The practice of the nuns are much more in terms of the Vinaya, the code of conduct is much more strenuous than sort of what the monks have to go through in their practice, right? This was when questioned about it, the Buddha would say that this was because, or these sort of rules and regulations, the extra rules and regulations were promulgated, right? Because obviously the rules and regulations were never promulgated before or enforced, or not enforced. Enforced is more law enforcement, but more sort of promulgated and asked of the Buddha. No rule was promulgated before and transgression occurred, right? The rules, all the rules in the monastic code, except the 8, we call them the Garu Dhammas, or the 8 rules that the nuns have to follow. You may all know these 8 rules, right? The nuns have to follow, except those 8. All the rest of the rules mentioned within the monk's code of conduct and the nun's code of conduct were enforced, or rather promulgated, after a transgression happened, right? After a transgression happened. But with regard to certain areas of curing, now sort of curing or curing these transgressions, the enforcements laid down by the Buddha was a little bit strict, I would say, right? It was a little bit stricter, right? I would say, even if that is a word, right? How, right? You would think, how was it strict, right? Now, for example, let me give you an example. Now, the monks and the nuns have a certain type or class of rules called the Sanghadisesas, right? The Sanghadisesas. Now, these Sanghadisesas are transgressions that has to be mended. If you transgress one of these rules, it must be confessed to another monk. For the monks, you have to confess it to a monk. For the nuns, you had to confess it to either a nun or a monk. And it is up until you confess, so you are expected to go through a process of rehabilitation. In Pali, we call this Abhana and Manata, right? A process of rehabilitation. So this is somewhat of a disciplining process, to not take the rules lightly. So what would the monks have to do? So if a monk transgresses this rule, one or more of the rules of the Sanghadisesa, it has to be confessed. If a monk does not confess before sunrise, that monk has to go through a penance period of 1 day for every sunrise that he passes, right? For every sunrise. So let us say that I have transgressed one of the rules today. I do not confess, right? I do not confess or sort of open up about my transgression to another monk by the sunrise tomorrow. So 6 or 4 o'clock, I'm sorry, about 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, around whatever time the sun rises, right? So what would happen? Then I would have to go through what we call a penance period, or a bhana for 1 day, right? So if I am not to confess for 7 days, I would have to go through for 7 days. That is including the 7 days of the rehabilitation period. So 7 days of rehabilitation plus 1 day for every day that you have missed out on the confession, right? Now that is the way the monks work, right? Now during this period, now it is a stressful period. I mean, if you hear a monk, you have to go, and during the time of rehabilitation, you must always sleep. Even when you're sleeping, you have to sleep with one eye open, right? Meaning, if a monk comes into the monastery and leaves, regardless of you knowing or not, your penance is violated or broken. So you have to stay awake, or at least one person, or you listen to the sounds or whatnot. If you hear a monk even in the road, right, even on the road, you have to sort of run behind them and confess it to them. It is such a struggle, right? Now we think that is a struggle. Now listen to what the bhikkhunis have to do, right? Now the monks have to sort of protect, or rather confess to any other monk who comes close to the monastery, to the vicinity of the monastery. If you see a robe, you must run behind that person, or even if you hear a sound, you must go to that monk, right? What have the nuns? So the monks only have to protect the boundary of your monastery, right? What do the nuns have to do? Now let us say there is a nunnery, let us say in Colchester, where I live, right? The nuns have to guard the whole city. If any nun or monk enters into the city of Colchester, oh my gosh, just imagine how how strenuous that must have been, and the nuns would have to go and sort of apprehend that person, that monk or nun, and then run to them, confess, and then get it over with. So that was very, very strenuous. In Sri Lanka, an example that I remember is during the time of President Chandrika Bandaranaike, Madam President Chandrika Bandaranaike, there was a city which was consecrated just for this, right? A small guardable city that was consecrated just for the process of doing the penance and the curing of the Sanghadisesas, right? So with the request of the monks, there was a city which was consecrated legally, right, by constitution, just to help the monks and the nuns sort of do this, right? So it is a very serious task. And also the fact is, if you do not cure it, you sort of have it in your mind as a hindrance, right? So that is just a bit of background. I think it is very interesting to know that is the extent to which the nuns of the past, of course, even today, they work to sort of protect their morality, to protect themselves without any sort of transgression, especially in terms of a Sanghadisesa offense, right? So it was a lot of hard work. And the Buddha says why this is necessary is because, right, to not lose the, if it was an easy process, we would be transgressing it all the time, right? That is why the Buddha has sort of laid down these curing natures, and the Buddha feels that in a way that it is easier for transgressions to sort of take place if the rules were a bit more lax. So that's why he has sort of created these sort of rules of these nature, right? Coming on to the sutta, the Ananda, right? Now this is a conversation between Ananda and the rest of the nuns, right? So there is within this sutta, there are 3 points which is discussed, right? There are 3 points which is discussed, right? Now, if we are just to brush through, right, there is a nun who is severely ill, right? There is a nun who is ill. She's going through pain, right? She's severely ill, and she requests, right? She requests that Venerable Ananda visits them, right, out of sympathy. Now, this requesting a monk to visit. Now, this is back in the day, and even now, actually, now even in a monastery, Now I am a monk of 7 rains, right? Now I cannot even now in a proper monastic setting, right, which of course still very much exists in proper, there are a lot of proper monasteries which sort of operate with all of these rules. I cannot even request the time from a monk of 8 rains, right? So the seniority, right, is very much respected. Also the fact of not getting another senior monk to do any work for you, that is a sort of respect, or the framework of respect that we have in the monastery. So you see, within the sutta, it speaks a lot about the amount of respect you feel the nun sort of has. She says, out of sympathy, right, please request, after having bowed down at Venerable Ananda's feet, right, please request that it would be good, right? Even the wording is put out in such a way that it is not at all a command, or not at all a way sort of, it's more of in a way that it would be good, right? Now this type of conversation, it is not as strict as in Sri Lanka, right? But there are certain monasteries in Sri Lanka which also follows this fashion. It is very much strict within the forest tradition of Thailand, right? So Achan Chah traditions, Ajahn Mun Bodhisattva's traditions, all these traditions, they follow this very, very, very closely, right? Very closely, and they have a very dignified, a very sort of, they have a scrupulous way of sort of teaching the monks to sort of speak, right, to speak, and how the words, because they believe that these words affect, and of course it does, the words affect the way the mind sort of thinks and behaves, and it is true, it does, right? But in Sri Lanka, we are more lax about it, whereas in countries such as Thailand, they're much more stricter, or they're much more strict about that sort of thing, right? And the Venerable Ananda, right? Venerable Ananda accepted in silence. Then in the early morning, having put on his robes and carrying his bowl and outer robe, he went to the nun's quarters. The nun saw Venerable Ananda coming from afar. On seeing him, she laid down on the bed, having covered her head out of respect, right? Out of respect, she covered. Now, in a usual instance, she would not be laying on a bed. She would, of course, be bowing down and showing respect. But Gilana, when she is sick, she is allowed to sort of be in this way. Also, we must understand the dynamic between the monks and the nuns, right? The dynamic of the monks and the nuns is very much important to be understood, because the nuns are very much within this time, within this scenario, very much independent of the teachings that come down from the monks after the Buddha, because the monks are very much closer to the Buddha, because the male monks do live with the Buddha himself, right? So they have sort of first access to the Buddha almost, right? Not to say that the nuns were in any way sort of segregated, no. But of course, because of the fact that the monks are close to the Dhamma, the Bhikkhunis would expect that the monks would sort of carry down and sort of come to them and preach the Dhamma and expound what the Buddha has said. Because you could imagine how busy the Buddha was through the day. There were kings, there were queens, there were the princes, the princesses, all the other lay folk, ministers, the monks, right? Then the monks, then the visiting monks, all these people, the amount of energy the Buddha must have had, right? Even if you are to take the sort of the way how strenuous the life of these chief prelates and the Sangha Nayakas, the head monks of the chapters, how busy they are, and to even compare that with the routine of the Buddha the Buddha surely had so much of strength, right? and sort of perseverance, surely, mentally, to be able to sort of do this each and every single day, right? But there were also instances that the Buddha stopped all of that, even stopped teaching, and went into the forest and needed his sort of silence, which I completely understand, which is very understandable, I think, for all of us, right? So Venerable Ananda, right? He speaks about 3 points specifically, right? The first being, right? The first being food, right? Then Venerable Ananda approached the nun and on arrival sat down on a prepared seat. As he was sitting there, he said to the nun, "This body, sister, comes into being through food, and yet it is by relying on food that food is to be abandoned." Now, food is to be abandoned. What is the meaning here, and how does one rely on food to be abandoned, right? Moving down the paragraph, will go up and come down, go up and come down, right? This body, sister, comes into being through food, and yet it is on relying on food that food is to be abandoned. Thus was it said, and in reference to what was it, what to reference to what was it said, there should be a comma there. Now, a personal comment of mine, access to insight is a little bit bleak to me to read, actually. I find it very bland. Not in a way, of course, the translation is on point, but I feel like there are more spiritually inclined translations somehow, right? So reading from access to insight, I find it a little bit, I find it a little bit difficult compared to reading something from sort of the Minding Center, Singapore, done by that gentleman who I think is fantastic and has a beautiful understanding. And certain other translations, Bhikkhuni's translations, I quite enjoy reading myself. Yes, Don. Yes, Bhikkhuni's translations are quite good. I find access to insight, reading or going through a long sutta through access to insight. I mean, I'm sure there are very respectable scholars sort of going through this, but I really think there can be more passion in the words that are used. Just a personal comment of mine, right? Just a personal comment and a preference of mine. You might like access to insight, right? So what this talks about is now food is something that we cannot sort of live without. Food is something that we absolutely need, right? But within a practitioner's life, food has to be treated with a lot of care. Why? Because if you would understand, for a person now, food, in terms of the consumption of food, there is only a dukkhata or an act of wrongdoing in terms of consuming food without proper contemplation. Why is it just an act of wrongdoing? Because food is something the Buddha says, and the Buddha is actually questioned on this. Why, Bhante, do you not enforce more rules about the consuming of food? The Buddha says, how, Ananda? Food is something that everyone must consume, right? And because of that, if I am to make the rules of consuming food more tight or to enforce more rules on it, that would create a great amount of stress. The subduing of the cravings towards food should come from within through the practice that one is doing, rather than the rules and regulations enforced, because food is a part of our life force, the Buddha says, right? So let's go down to this sutta part now, right? There is a case, sister, where a monk, considering it thoughtfully, takes food, not not playfully, nor for intoxication, nor for putting on bulk, nor for beautification, but simply for the survival and continuance of this body, for ending its afflictions, for the support of the holy life. Thus will I destroy all feelings of hunger and not create new feelings from overeating. Now, this is specifically about overeating, not to overeat. Now, I would like to like go deeper into this part about simply for survival and continuance of body. Now, we understand, all of you are people who have been following the Dhamma for quite some time. You have an understanding to what it feels like, or what it is like being in Asia, right? Being in Asia, living in Asia, right? And you would understand the cultural dynamic of India, Asia, Sri Lanka with regards to when this sutta is taught and preached. Now, for me, thinking that I'm consuming food for survival, for me, is a little bit hypocritic, right? Because let me explain to you why. Survival is a really sort of difficult, it's a really sort of harsh word, I would think, right? Because in today's world, we have an abundance of food. We have an abundance of food, right? Anywhere with that we go, we have an abundance of food, and we do not have to collect our food as the monks used to collect their food or receive their food from the times that they used to live, right? These monks now, for example, if you would go to the lifestyles of these monks, these monks would have to walk kilometers upon kilometers, miles upon miles, to reach a city or town or a village where they would receive their alms, which is quite not the situation of the time that we live in, right? So here I would say, if these monks consumed an amount of food, now I remember, my gosh, living in an austeric monastery, like for example Nimalava, which I lived in for a bit of time, right? Which is up to, I think, which is currently and will be for some more time to come the most austeric monastery in Sri Lanka. We have to walk through the sort of the desert sort of jungle. It's not a jungle even, it's sort of the desert sort of tundra climate, like ferns and thorns and all of that, to reach the refectory or the dining hall, where we would be given food, and we would have our fans, and we would be expected to close our sort of hide our faces and not look at anything. We are only supposed to look at our hands, right? Only supposed to look at our hands. And when we, so with the sort of strictness of training, we don't even see the face of the devotees. It is only the head monk who will see the face of the devotees and no other monks. So we do not, with that kind of austerity and all of that, it was also very, very, very hot, right? Very, very hot. Now, for those of you who have seen my alms bowl, right, which I have a size, I think I have a size 8, right? I used to, when I was living in the monastery, I used to eat about a bit more than a half of the alms bowl, right? That much, which is a lot of food. It is a lot of food. But at 3 o'clock, we would all be hungry again because it is so hot, let me tell you. Right. I'm just going to grab my arms bowl to just emphasize on how much of food it was. Now, for the people looking at this from YouTube, this is going to be, so this is my arms bowl, right? So this is the same thing that I use. So this is how deep it is, right? So I would probably eat to about this much, and all the monks would. Just imagine this much of food, right? It's a lot, right? This much of food. And we would be very hungry again by 3, 4 o'clock, my gosh. Right? And it would be, and but of course no one was, I was much more smaller than I am now, and no, everyone would be so healthy, because of course, because of the heat, we would be sweating out a lot, and we would digest the food very, very fast. It was that hot. And also, when you are sort of, when we go to sleep at night, we can only sleep, like I always slept at around 1 or 2 in the morning, because the stones, because it's caves with one wall, right? It would be so hot. The heat that these stones absorb during the day would all be released in the night, right? So I usually, there was a sort of a bigger rock right next to my cave. So I would just climb that and just I would be first chanting at the chaitya till about 10 o'clock. I would be chanting almost a whole Pirikpoto almost, right? It was beautiful, right? The head monk did get annoyed by me because apparently he heard my chanting while he was chanting. And he asked me to just quiet down a bit, which I did, right? And then we would come back to the kutis and we would meditate. But amazing meditation. I would say that is the most, it's not at all comfortable living there. And then you have the animals, the pythons and the snakes and, the all of that. And then you have the elephants, so when we sort of go out in the morning, there was at one night there was an elephant sort of in my sort of it's not a garden, but rather my, what do you call it, the open area in front of my cave, right? And then I wanted to go to the loo, which was outside of my, which was outside, and then I really had to hold it up until the morning and just go to sleep. No way was I going to go out. I was from Colombo. That was not going to go. I was not going to go out. So it's quite nice. It's quite nice. But the fact that we do not have to eat to survive now, right? So you can eat smaller portions than actually the monks. So now, compared to, I'm eating comparatively nothing, compared to what I would be eating in a monastery like that, right? Because we are not eating to survive, we are just eating to quench our hunger. That's basically it, right? And we have an abundance of food, right? We have an abundance of food where we live, right? All of us, right? And easy access to this food as well. Now, the monk, right? So what does Venerable Ananda say about this, right? This body sister comes into being through food, and yet it is relying on food. That food has to be abandoned, right? Thus was it said, as in the reference to this. Now it is relying, so you use food to sustain yourself, and that is it, right? To sustain yourself. Now this is specifically, people of course, sometimes take this to a whole new level, but always remember, be organic. Don't push yourself. That is very important in the practice. Do not push yourself into extremes, right? Because we are not enlightening ourselves through the body. Remember, that is yoga. Those are the Hindu traditions. We are not enlightening ourselves through the body. We are enlightening ourselves from the mind, right? So you might, whatever that you put into the body or do with the body, you have to do it in a way that it supports the mind and doesn't stress the mind out to a level where now the mind is sort of fighting with the body, or you're fighting with the mind to say that this is what I should be doing. So always be organic. Take it slow, right? There is no reason for us to sort of be running a rat race, right? If you are running a rat race, right? Now, moving on, right? The second part, if you go up again, right? The next paragraph after, right? This body comes into being through craving, and yet it is by relying on craving that craving is to be abandoned. What does this mean? Moving downwards again to the thick paragraph there. This body comes into being through craving, and yet it is relying on craving that craving is to be abandoned. Thus was it said. And in reference to what was it said, right? Say, through the ending of the fermentations has entered, there is a case, sister, where a monk hears. The monk named such and such, they say, through the ending of the fermentations has entered and remains in the fermentation-free awareness, release, and discernment release. Having known and realized them for himself in here and now, the thought occurs to him, I hope I too, I hope I too see and experience what this is. But remember this craving of I hope I too. Now what, why is it called craving here? Because the wisdom, more than the wisdom aggregate, right, it is more of a liking. I hope I too had that. Now I might be relating about monasteries and all of these things, and I'm sure even in your heart, oh, I thought, I wish I too had an experience like that or something like that. Now, because it is more of towards that experience rather than with the wisdom. But when the wisdom aggregate comes in and you understand that process more, it is not craving, it becomes nekkamma, or a factor that directly relates to the attainment of nibbana. Right? So it is no longer called craving. We discussed this before, where we said if it is craving, it is something that sort of you build up rather than get rid of. But with regards to the attachment that you have towards nibbana, why is that not tanha or greed? That is because with greed you accumulate, with nekkamma or practices leading towards nibbana or practices found with the foundation of wisdom, what happens is it gets rid of stuff, right? It gets rid of the kilesas, the cankers, defilements, and all of these things, right? Now, the next para. This body comes into being through conceit, and yet it is by relying on conceit that conceit should be abandoned. Thus was it said. And in reference to what was it said, there is in the case, sister, where a monk hears the monk named such and such, they say, through the ending of the fermentations has entered and remained in the fermentation-free awareness release and discernment release, having known and realized them for himself in the here and now. The thought occurs to him, the monk such and such, they say, through the ending of fermentations going on, then why not me? If he does it, why can't I? Right? If he does it, why can't I? Now, I think those of you who have sort of listened to me, while I was in London and all of that, I used to relate this story where when I first sort of went into the meditation retreat in Burma, right, there were so many monks, right, and I was because I was, of course, I was a very, very young baby almost, right, in compared to the rest of the monks. So I was given a seat right at the end of the hall, right at the end of the hall. So I used to be very lackadaisical, right? And, I would meditate 5 minutes, get up and then do a walking meditation. And, because obviously when you're just starting off, it is a bit difficult, right? And then this happened for about 2 days. And I was like, no way am I going to allow this to be my meditation. And I went to the monk in charge of the seats and I told him, I need a seat right in the front. I demanded it. I think he was a bit shocked as well from my demeanor. And I said, I need a seat right in the front. Right? So he put me in a seat. Right next to the 30 reigns, my gosh, the Mahatheras. Right. And I also did see of course, the 10 reigns and the 20 reigns. They would sort of look at me when I'm walking all the way to the front, probably wondering where is this runt going off to, right? Because I was so small. Right. But the reason that I did it, because obviously I knew who I was. And I obviously knew that my conceit, right? Because my conceit, and I thought, okay, I should use this to support my practice. So I got the seat right in front. And when I sat right in front, because of my stupidity and ignorance, of course, I would always sort of think that the others are looking at me, right? Which was obviously not true. They are not jobless. They were not looking at me. Right? Surely they were not looking at me, right? They were not jobless. They were in their jhanas and their states of bliss, right? But the conceit tells you, the others are looking at you, you better not move. And I knew this would happen, right? So because I sat in the front now from this first sitting itself, because of conceit, let me tell you, right? Because of conceit, I was able to really develop my practice. Of course, after a couple of days, that just goes away, right? That sort of, the thing that, others are looking at you, and then you really get into the practice. But in the beginning, it really helped. And of course, 1 week, 2 week, 1.5 hours of meditation now, which is quite good compared to the 5 minutes of dodgy meditation that I was doing at the back of the hall, So this is a way that you can use sort of conceit to help yourself, right? Conceit to say, even to sort of conceit to say, conceit to say, sort of to even think that you are going to do better, that the ego or whatnot is sort of petty, and that you are going to do better. That is also a type of conceit. And in sort of thinking, so you get this sort of this power almost to sort of to overcome the defilements in a certain way. But of course, it's not a long-term practice. It is to give you that kick start to sort of go on, and then you shed the defilements, you shed that conceit a little bit, where you now have more grounding and base with Dhamma and the true practice, right? Moving on, right? That is conceit. And then the body comes into being through sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse is to be abandoned. With regard to sexual intercourse, the Buddha declares the cutting off of the bridge completely, right? So that is with regards to, of course, this has been taught to the nuns, right? This has been taught to the nuns. I would also like to add, as a point of information, I would also like to add, for example, Vasaka, having attained to sainthood at a very young age, had many children, right? Like many other kings and queens and princesses and lay folk who were living household lives whilst also practicing Dhamma in a very serious way, right? In a very serious way. So this is what is said in this sutta, where you use the defilements to move on, or to sort of work on your own practice, using the defilements to sort of further your practice, right? Now, that is the end of this sutta. Moving on to the next sutta, right? No. Right? Okay. This is called the Bhikkhuni Vasaka Sutta. Sometimes it is referred to as the Bhikkhuni Sutta as well. Right? I really like this translation. I know for some of you it is a bit weighty, but the thing is, for me personally, I like a lot of information. And that is what sort of gets me interested in a sutta, right? For those of you who would like, hold on. For those of you who would, no. All right. So now the Bhikkhuni Vasaka Sutta, right? The Bhikkhuni Vasaka Sutta is a sutta, again, an exchange, or rather an exchange between the Buddha and Ananda. After Ananda visits the monks' quarters, comes back to the Buddha, and then relates the sort of the interaction the Buddha had with the nuns. Interaction that Ananda had with the nuns, right? So the nuns in this sutta, the nuns are, it is said, if you would see, can you see my mouse moving by any chance? Yes, you can. Wonderful, right? So now you can see, now here Venerable Ananda, some nuns dwelling, so now the nuns, Venerable Ananda having gone to the nuns' quarters, right? Having respectfully been greeted and, offered a seat and all of that, the whole process, which we are quite familiar with. Here, Venerable Ananda, some nuns dwelling with their minds well established in the 4 focuses of mindfulness, perceive, discern progressively higher distinctions. Now, this is to say the nuns are practicing vipassana, insight meditations, and they are progressing towards the higher attainments of of vipassana, or the states leading to enlightenment. So this is to say that the nuns were hard workers. They were doing a pretty good job, right? And they were really keeping at it, and which I think was really, really true in many instances, because the nuns had uh, sort of, because the nuns were only allowed ordination much after the Buddha allowed the monks ordination, the nuns really had to put their backs into the practice, because the nuns had to sort of prove to the Buddha that the nuns could also do it, if you understand what I mean. So the nuns really, if you go to sort of, there are beautiful expounds from the nuns, and I think it's wonderful. And of course, we know that ladies also, when they do put their minds onto sort of doing something, they're really good at it. And I think they also, in a way, they're less distracted. I would say, compared to the males. Right. That is a pointer. Please don't come at me or the males here. Right. But I think that the women do have a lot of sort of perseverance and energy to sort of get stuff done when they put their minds into it. So the nuns were actually doing a good job, right? Then Venerable Ananda, unmuted their mic. Okay, I'm just going to allow participants. Okay, so you will now not be able to unmute your mic, just so that we might carry on fast. All right. If you want to say something, please hands up emoji or the clap emoji. Right. So then the Venerable Ananda reports this to the Buddha, right? He reports this to the Buddha, whatever his interaction with the nuns were, and then with that, what happens is the Buddha now relates this very, very important doctrine about directed cultivation and undirected cultivation, right? Now, directed cultivation as we know it, right? Directed cultivation as we know it is the practice of vipassana, right? What is specifically what is the practice of vipassana? The practice of vipassana is the 4 foundations of mindfulness, satipatthana, right? This is what we are relating to in terms of what the Buddha was relating to in terms of what directed cultivation is. Now, directed cultivation, I will come back to this part after, right? For now, I'm going to just quickly go down to undirected cultivation, right? Now, this is what this sutta is really offering, right? Now, undirected cultivation, and how Ananda is undirected cultivation done, right? Undirected cultivation done, right? Now, what is the Pali? Now, you see the Pali, avitakko. Avitakkom hi avicharo, right? Now, this is avitakkom hi avicharo. What does this mean? We know the word vitaka vichara, yes? We know the words vitaka vichara, which is initial application and sustained application. Initial application and sustained application upon what? Samatha, right? Samatha, or focus-oriented practices, right? But, right, now going down, let us see what this is, right? Let us see what the Buddha has to tell us, right? Ananda, a monk not directing his mind outwardly, understands my mind is not directed outwardly, right? My mind is not directed outwardly. And then he understands it is not narrow, which means constricted, right? Constricted after or before, freed and undirected. Now, what does this mean, right? What does this mean? Now, here, it simply refers to the consistency in terms of the consistency that we have in terms of the practice, right? Now, then, if you see, please look at these underline, what is underlined. Now, observing, watching the body in the body, observing, watching the feelings as feelings. So, Kaya-anupassana, Vedana-anupassana, Chitta-anupassana, and Dhamma-anupassana. These are the 4 Satipatthanas, right? Now, what does this mean, right? Now, what does this mean? Now, what it means is that now when we practice, now most of you all who have practiced Vipassana, right, have practiced Vipassana would have noticed, and when you guys do talk to me in sort of seeking some advice with regards to your practice, I always tell you, it is very important, this undirected and directed practice. The directed practice, what it does, as you practice it, okay, one question. Samantha, was there inequality between men and women even during the Buddha's time? Samantha, 60 years ago, women could not enter a hotel. Of course, there was inequality. Right? Of course, there was inequality, right? And there is still inequality, I believe. And I think it is our responsibility in understanding the Dhamma to such an extent that we break down these barriers now and we just grow out of it. Was inequality something that the Buddha instigated? No. The Buddha always said, and maybe if we have time in the future, we will discuss certain sutras. The Buddha says, this is all craving, this is all attachment, this is all a formation of the aggregates and nothing else. So, the Buddha would always relate and put, it would come in relation to women and women and men. The Buddha would always say, these are aggregates, right? We experience different experiences, and through meditation, Vipassana, you understand these experiences and you work towards your nirvana. What the Buddha was really bothered about was nibbana. And how? Yes, all right. So the Buddha did not that he did not want to teach the females, Samantha. The Buddha did not allow ordination for the nuns at first. The first thing was the interaction between the monks and the nuns. He knew that because of the interaction between the males and the females, there would be, and there were, and it is not a hidden fact. It is very much a fact shown within the Vinaya, right? All the stories, all the scandals are there. It is out in the open, right? It is out in the open. And also, as now Don has mentioned, it was giving such a place to because the Buddha had to protect the Dhamma, giving such a place to the women of the time was a very, very radical move. Yes, right? But even more than that, we have to understand, I think, how the history of women. Women were not allowed education. Women were people who were really mistreated, right? They were treated as objects of sexual pleasure and as sort of baby carriers, if I may use that word, right? And so women were a class of society that were really not treated well. Hence, you could imagine the education, etc., the issues that followed with not having education, not having that sort of empowerment, the difficulties they would have created within a community, right? All of those factors had to be taken into consideration. But that is why the Buddha allowed the involvement of the women, right? With involvement of the women, with the 8 rules, right? That the Buddha said the women or the nuns had to follow. This was to bring the women also into a certain equal position, an equal position of the monks, in a way of discipline, in a way of contribution, in a way of sort of have a similar environment, right? In a similar environment to sort of also get, because if those rules were not there, there would have been many problems. Now, for example, any old monk is not able to go into a nunnery and preach to the nuns. You are not allowed. You have to be designated to talk and speak and admonish the nuns, not to talk and speak, to admonish the nuns, right? Because it was a position that the Buddha, he said, for example, if I may use an example from the Vinaya, if there has been any transgression of rules on a monk's part with a nun, that monk is never allowed to ever admonish the nuns, right? It is said that, why is that? Because it is within the most logical nature of the nuns to sort of say, okay, he is the one who did this, because there was clearly the cultural implications, of course, the difference between the sexes, the way the mind works, all of these things, right? There was clearly, the nuns' practice was obviously seen as a sort of a separate, or the nuns were seen as separate from the monks, right? Although they were very much a part of the Sangha. So I would sort of see that as the politics between the monks and the nuns, and the way that you would see. So even, for example, even in this sutta that we did before, look at how short the interaction between the nuns and Ananda were, right? Look at how short that interaction is, right? Now, Venerable Ananda having visited, so there is a clear sort of a power dynamic in there. But those are not things that we speak of in Theravada Buddhism, I think, right? Those are not things that we like to really sort of see it all in an awe-inspiring, enlightening manner. But we have to sort of understand, I think, the way of the world during that time. But let's move on. Let's come to this topic later on. It's interesting, I think, to discuss and go on. But I would, of course, say, no, the Buddha was not, the Buddha always spoke about men and women, even straight, even with regard to sexuality. The Buddha, what he would say is, because there were sort of certain differences in sexual orientations even during the time of the Buddha, and the Buddha never said this is wrong or not. The Buddha said this is lust. Lust is a fire that burns far greater than any other fire. So work to get rid of this lust. That is all he said, right? So no problem, Samantha. Now, coming on to the next sutta, right? I'm sorry. Yes, so directed and undirected, right? So in undirected practices, now undirected practices would usually relate to the samatha practice. But talking about this in a more practical manner, this also would entail mundane practices such as retreats that one would go for, right? Or let us say full moon day observances, right? Keeping the morals, right? Keeping the morals, taking special morals or the precepts on special precepts on certain days, going out to visit monasteries or temples and doing sort of prayers or whatnot. All of these practices falls under undirected practices or undirected meditations, right? Undirected meditations. What are these? These meditations are used to sort of lighten up the atmosphere. Specifically, lighten up the atmosphere, because when you start or be a person who trains within Vipassana, right? Goes into it, 2 weeks goes into, you stagnate. It really happens. You stagnate, you feel a bit bored, right? You feel a bit bored. Now, if I am to, you see the word that comes, now here you see the word narrow constricted is used, right? The word narrow constricted is used. And with regards to with regards to directed and undirected, right? Directed and undirected, the word, this word of the sluggish nature, right, where the mind is to sort of fall, or the mind is sort of now becoming a little bit slower than it used to, or that is specifically something that we experience during the practice of vipassana in the long term, right? So even in power traditions, right, Mahasi is a little bit more strict. Mahasi continues to stick to the Mahasi techniques of meditation, usually stick to mindfulness in a very sort of in a very aggressive way, but the power traditions, but they all at one point go. That is why cleaning is very important, right? Taking showers, cleaning the house, cleaning the monastery, all of these sangha activities, the things that we do together, are absolutely important, right? And these practices, now let me tell you, I have spoken to you time and time again. I have told you, right, you are a mother, you are a father, you might be a daughter, you might be a son, whoever you are, right? All the good things that we do out of choice. You do not have to do any of these things. You can be a bad husband, you can be a bad mother, right? These are decisions that you make, right? So, but I know most of you all are good parents and all of that, I know that, right? What I am saying is, or what I am trying to say is, use these things, or use these sort of roles that you play in your life in a way that it progressively helps you in your path, right? So you now being nice to, or you sort of being compassionate towards your husband, you're not doing it as a wife, you're doing it as a human being who's working towards nibbana. It becomes more, in one way it becomes more sufferable, right? In another way in another way, it becomes each and everything that you do, from each and every piece of toast that you would make for your kids, now you are making that into a practice. And look here, we live in one of the most busiest countries, or we live close to one of the most busiest cities in the whole entire planet, right? Obviously we need all the practice that we could get, right? And how do you do that? You do all of what you do is towards your practice, the love for your children, the love that you have for your wife or husband, the loyalty that you have towards family. Use these things in a way that it is a way that it supports and pushes you progressively upwards in the path of nibbana. That is very important, very important. You would hear many suttas. If you go to the if you go to even um, the Udana Pali, where after the monks and the nuns, the Thera Gatha and Theri Gatha, they call it, right? The monks and the nuns, how they sort of, they speak about how they were devoted to their husbands, or how they were devoted to their family, the children, all of these things. Now, when as monks and nuns, right, what we would be doing in the monastery, now these monks and nuns, when you ordain, they are your brothers and sisters, right? Now when I was at PAO, the Sri Lankan nuns used to cook for us sometimes, actually most of the time, and bring food up and all of that, and just serve us some pol sambola, maybe some coconut sambola, or in a way that we were like family, we take care of each other. If a monk, now usually something that I did was, because I had better support, financial support from my family, I used to support if monks needed to sort of go to hospital or something. It was not in a way that I am doing for someone else. It was like family. We had to take care of ourselves, right? And obviously the monastery does not support everything, because there are 1,500 monks and nuns in the monastery. The monastery is unable to support everyone, so you are supposed to sort of hold or have your own support. But they do sort of offer food and sort of certain basic medicines and all of that. But in more than that, you need to be able to support yourself. But in that way, we did it in a way that it was family, right? But every time that we would do it, we would recollect the merit of it, right? The practice, why we should. And it becomes, even if that person later on becomes a person that you are not very happy to talk to anymore, yet you are happy in your heart that you have done the merit of helping another person, right? Now when you almost all of you have big children. Sometimes when children grow up, when they're no longer smaller, and or even during their teenage years, they don't listen to you sometimes, or they have their opinions of their own. Especially teenage kids of this time, they think they know everything, right? Just because they know how to log on to YouTube, right? So likewise, when, of course, it is very easy for us to get hurt, but during those times, if one is in the practice of doing or helping one's family in way of it progressing in the practice, then one does not feel weak at the end when your children leave and all of these things. And also, you're progressive day by day, each and every moment that you do some sort of service to your family, you are gaining or climbing up the ladder of nibbana, right? And this practice is quite important in that way. This practice is very important in that way. Now, if we this, right? Now, this directed practice that we are going to talk about, this directed practice, right, is now in this directed practice, what we do is we direct our attention, right? We direct our attention towards certain practices. Now, with regards to the vipassana, we go through the vipassana, we go through the four foundations of mindfulness, right? And when you feel as if the mind needs a bit of refreshing, when you're feeling a bit dull, when you're feeling a bit down, like you need a bit of motivation, right? Tapetva bhavana. Tapetva is having put aside. Tapetva is to put, right? Lay, to put something down, right? So having put aside the content, the practice for a moment, you now do something which is an inspiring meditation. These inspiring meditation can be Buddhanusati, Dhammanusati, Sanghanusati, any of the samatha objects. You could be the bringing in of samadhi or focus-oriented practices into cooking, cleaning, whatever that you're doing, a retreat. And this refreshes the mind. And this is very important. This is very important. When people now, even in monasteries, however developed our practice is, we have to clean and help out with the chores of the monastery. We have to do it because it is very instrumental in the mind not becoming dull. And the mind does become dull. We are humans, people, and we are battling with a mind which has been seasoned within sort of getting, or seasoned in a way that it has got used to the excitement of the mundane world. So obviously practicing vipassana for long amounts of time will sort of make us a little bit dull sometimes. That is when you need this inspiration. This inspiration needs to come through. Some sort of practice that sort of gives you a refreshing feel. So make sure, if you are meditating at home, make sure you book yourself into a retreat, that you go somewhere out on a retreat and you allow yourself that experience, that time, to sort of freshen you up, to give you a bit more motivation. Listening to Dhamma talks is a very important role as well. And I think when you have a mind that sort of wanders around, the Dhamma is something that you need use to reprogram the mind in MBCT practices or MBSR practices, mindfulness based stress reduction or mindfulness based cognitive therapy practices. Through the 2 months or through the 8 weeks practice or the course, you are given so much of material, so much of videos, so much of journaling to do. Why? To reprogram the mind, to get the mind used to the Dhammic way of life, or the Dhammic way of thinking, or the way of thinking that internalize, that you are able to go deeper into yourself to realize whatever which is sort of hindering your mental health or happiness, right? And this is very much important even within. Now, we have not taken it from MBSR or MBCT. MBCT has taken it from us, okay? Just to put it down there. Right? Because sometimes I know these MBSR and MBCT practitioners like to say that they were the founders of it, but no way, Jose. Right? We were the Buddha was the founders of it, and it is very much taught within within our Dhamma, that this was predominant. Now, within this practice, right? Within this practice, we know, right? When we go through, where directed is when you direct your practice towards these refreshing meditations, and undirected is the normal practices of satipatthana, right? Or the four mindfulness meditation subjects. Now, with regards to this, right? Now, there is this word, right? Inspiring, inspired, roused, gladdened, right? Now, this is a important thing to understand. What does this mean, right? Now, then Ananda directed cultivation. Then Ananda, the monk, should direct the mind to some inspiring sign, pasadaniya nimitta. This sign should be something which inspires you, right? That is the role of a temple, a monastery, right? To inspire the practice of Dhamma. I think in today's world, we like to sometimes, of course, there are some people who prefer not to go, but there are a lot of people who do prefer to go. But the role that you are to the role the monastery of the temple is supposed to play for the lay people is to inspire the development of a practice, right? Inspire the development of the practice, right? Now, what is this? Now, let's go into this. When he directs his mind to an inspiring sign, gladness. Now, this is very important, people. Gladness, pamujja, zest, piti, his body is tranquil, pasadda, experiences happiness, sukha, attains samadhi. Now, for those of you who have gone through the breaking down of the paticca samuppada, right? The breaking down of the paticca samuppada, if you have gone through that, you might realize the effect these consciousnesses which are related to as pamujja, piti, trank, pasadda, and sukha and samadhi, in terms of the breaking down of the cycle of paticca samuppada. What that literally means is realizing nibbana. But to break down one's inspiration, the inspiration must be there. The inspiration is absolutely necessary, right? You might have meditated for many, many years. Do you feel as if you're still in the same place? If you feel like you have been in the same place, you're probably lacking one thing. Maybe you need to consult a teacher, right? That's of course, and discuss what you've been going through, right? The other thing is, predominantly with the people who have personally come to me, I've realized that it is an inspiration problem, right? You need, this is a practice that needs a bit of excitement in a good way, right? Excitement in a good way, meaning you have to have this glorified attachment, almost passion almost, right? But not in the way that it is craving in the mundane world for, or lusting for something, but rather passion for this practice. And that comes from wanting to be absolutely good, by wanting to help other people, to help yourself in whatever ways possible. And that is where this pamujja, piti, pasadda, sukha, samadhi comes for. When you are doing a practice such as buddhanusati, of course, having the practice of lighting a lamp for the Buddha will help your practice in a very good, positive manner, right? Going to a monastery, taking part in different retreats, spending time with monks, interacting with monks in a very private, personal way would give you that inspiration that you need, right? Would give you that inspiration that you need. And you need that. Staying and being a hatto meditator, you can do that, but you need to get out of the house and give yourself a bit more extra push to sort of jump the barriers, to challenge yourself, to see deeper parts of yourself, right? To see deep parts of yourself. Achan Chah, in his practice, he says, if a monastery has no problems, even Achan Brahm speaks about this. If a monastery has no problems, then that's a useless monastery. If a monastery does not have problems, it is said, then that is not a good monastery. You need to, because why? Because the problems, when they arise, it gives you an opening to parts of yourself that you did not know that existed. Exposing these parts allows you to work against and to get rid of these parts. When some people live in monasteries, of course monks specifically, because that's the place of monks, and because it is such a respectful environment of practice and all of that, sometimes practice and all of that, and when certain things, sometimes you are completely ignorant to the idea that there are still certain things that you would do in the position that you are pushed to it, right? We forget about it because you're living such wholesome lives, right? Such wholesome lives. You are well supported. You practice your meditation. You have your meditation teacher. It's like a whole sort of family. All of these things, of course, there are problems here and there, but predominantly, I would say now the monastery that I have been in predominantly in Burma, they're very, very peaceful places. There are no problems as such in that way. But when you, of course, for me personally, if I am very open with you, Sri Lanka, I really do not prefer being in Sri Lanka and sort of practicing Sri Lanka in the long term. For some reason, when I'm in a Sri Lankan monastery, I even get gastritis, right? But the moment that I leave the monastery, my gastritis is completely fine. But this could possibly be just me, right? But there are states, there are environments that you would find predominantly helpful to the practice, and this is something that you absolutely need. Pamujja, gladness, cess, preeti, tranquility, happiness, and samadhi. Let's leave samadhi out of it. Gladness, zest, tranquility, and happiness. These are mental mental experiences that helps you to jump from the attachment that we have to the round of rebirth in terms of dependent origination, to break down, to have a force of Dhamma within us that is able to break down the attachments and other defilements that we develop through our lifetime. Right? These factors are very important, and even on a daily basis, sometimes, it is necessary that we start off with a bit of vipassana. We go into a bit of samatha and we come back to vipassana, or we start with a bit of samatha and then we go into vipassana. There are ways and techniques that you mix certain things up. For example, if you do metta alone, right? If you do metta, loving kindness meditation on its own, if you mix it up with certain other subjects, for example, let's say Attika Sanya, or the perception of the skeleton, right? The result that you have from it is more towards the impermanence and anatta natures, which you do not usually get through just practicing metta bhavana, right? That we do not. Now, as we go on and we sort of go into these practices, you will have a better understanding of how you use it. For example, we use certain kasinas, we use certain elemental meditations, right? Elemental meditations with certain other practices, right? We could mix, for example, Attika Sanya and the Patavi Kasina, right? Patavi meditations, or the earth element meditations. Now these are deeper practices where you sort of in a way mix things up in a way where the results are different, in a way to sort of boost yourself in the practice, to give you the push and the shove that you need to sort of jump, or to develop the necessity to jump ahead of whatever defilements you might be festering in at the moment. Right? So this is a very important practice. Please remember this, and always remember, give yourself credit. Give yourself credit for all the things that you do, for family, for people around you, all of these things. And how do you give yourself credit? Be aware, do it in a way. Now, if you just give yourself credit, you are developing ego. right? If you just give yourself credit, oh, I'm a person who's done this and this and this and this and this, that is not what we need, right? What we need is for our mind to be more dedicated towards the practice in a way that the credit that we give ourselves strengthens us, empowers us in a way that we are able to sit down, meditate, samatha or vipassana, right? So how do you give yourself? You first of all had the aim, the compassion, any sort of love or compassion that you have towards nibbana. The goal is nibbana. When you have that sort of a goal, it is very powerful. It is absolutely powerful for you, right? So you will have a heightened sense of patience, a heightened sense of forbearance, a heightened sense of compassion to things that annoys you or things that would usually annoy you, right? So that is very important. And when you do have this goal, sati is something which becomes predominantly aware, because now every action that you do for another, when you're connecting it to the purpose of nibbana, sati arises again and again and again and again and again in your mind. When this happens, because of the sati empowers the mind. The sati truly empowers and gives you this feeling of energy that you can do it, right? That you can do it. And that is absolutely powerful and necessary, let me tell you, right? Absolutely powerful and necessary. Even as monks, nuns, any sort of spiritual person who have dedicated their whole lives to practice, we all need to do these sort of things to support our practice, right? The example that is used in the commentaries is, a man is carrying, right, a huge sort of what would you call a lot of sugar cane. You know how they would usually sort of carry sugar cane, right, to supplying sugar cane from the sugar cane forest or whatever you plantations to a city, right? Now sugar cane sugar cane is a very popular drink in Burma, let me tell you, right? so so anyways, out of the topic, but a man is carrying sugar cane to a city. So what does he do? He feeling tired, feeling a bit lethargic, feeling a bit need for some rest, right? He puts down the sugar cane, right, and he takes out a bit of sugar cane and he munches on it, right, and just relaxes a bit, right? And then after he relaxes a bit for a bit, he feels refreshed, he feels awake and alive, and he can do it again. So he carries the sugar cane up on his head again and completes his task and supplies the sugar cane to the city. In the commentaries, this is example that is used in relation to the usage of vipassana. And when the mind gets dull and sort of you feel like you need a bit of a refreshing feel, then you sort of go into the directed practices or the refreshing practices or the inspiring practices, and then you do a bit of that and you come back to the vipassana, right? It is only a temporary thing. The important thing, however, this is what I'm going to end with. When you do something in terms of the directed practices, the directed practices might be more refreshing and pleasurable compared to the vipassana, but one goes into it knowing that it is temporary and does not think about it after coming out of it, right? Do you understand? Now you go to a friend's house and they serve you tea or coffee in their finest china, right? Their finest china. Now you, the proper way, or a person who is sort of dignified and proper of manner and etiquette will not sort of come back home and think about that china that they drank tea with at their friend's place again and again and again. Yes, oh, it was lovely, you comment the china, oh, this is a lovely cup of lovely china that you have. You might choose to compliment your host, right? And you of course drink your tea, you do that, and you come off and you go about your business, right? Now that is the way that you do not sort of arouse craving or attachment to this temporary sort of process that you are experiencing, Right? This is only temporary. It is like being at home and going out for a jog. You do not cling on to it. You don't come back home. Oh, the jog was quite nice. I should jog inside the house. You don't do that, right? If you do, you need to get a checkup done. Right? So in that way, you practice whatever you're practicing, and then you leave it be, and you go back to your vipassana. Right? These are the practices, directed practices and undirected practices, and they are very, very important. We always remember, think about how you're going to integrate these practices into your life. It is, I think, we have so much of resources. Like me, there are so many other teachers, monks and lay people alike, doing so much of stuff online, and it's amazing. On there are so many TV channels with all of these stuff, even with certain TED talks or certain other stuff like Alan Watts, and there are so many teachers. There's so much of inspiration that we can gain, right? So gain your inspiration from different acts, bring it really into your life. Be an embodiment of Dhamma. That is so important to our lives, to be an embodiment of Dhamma. And oh, there are so many questions. Equality, I thought Buddha, because radical. Thank you. Kids, what about the temple which is built in a super elegant to attract people to? Okay, so there's a question, right, by Kitsri. All right. So if you do look at the question, right? Okay, what about the temples making elaborate? Okay, so I like to look at this in this way, right? Now these elaborate. Now I think I know what you're talking about specifically, but anyways, in a general way, right? These we spend, just imagine, for the lay people, right, the things that you would usually spend your income on, right, the things that you would know that we would normally spend our incomes on, right? Now elaborate offerings to the Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha were practices which were done since the time of the Buddha, right? And they were very, very elaborate, right? If we would read the suttas, we would know. I'm going to give you your rights back to unmute yourselves, right? So if you want to speak, you can. Now with regards to the practice, with regards to the past when the Buddha was living, the practice of offering elaborate offerings, right? It was very much a thing, offering the best you possibly could, right? That is one thing. It was always such. It is always such in, I think, in Hinduism, in Buddhism. People always wanted, because that is a way of showing respect, the respect that you have towards the Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha, right? Now, for example, even with the simple practice of giving danas, right? Now, for example, when people bring me dana, I mean, it's clear that people will not eat in their homes every day like this. But when they are giving a dana, even if it is just for one month, they want to give the best possible dana, and that they possibly could, right? This is a way, and that is very important. That is very important. Just imagine, your wife or your husband is the most powerful support that you have in this world, right? Just imagine you supporting another person, or you supporting a person who is not your wife or husband more than your wife and husband, right? Obviously you will have a pan or plate flying your way. But regardless of that, or you might also get kicked out of the house, but regardless of that, it is wrong. We need to give due respect and show due gratitude for the people that, or the wisdom that that we receive. And this is the respect that we have towards the Dhamma. Now, in another way, the Buddha does specifically talk to us about the karma, and the karma of offering and being a part of such elaborate offerings. Now we do know, in terms of the commerce that we have, we know there is, we might be very educated, but there is a clear disparity of wealth between the communities, right? Between different classes of people and different communities of people. This is spoken of as, or given in relation to, the commerce that we have done in the past, which is a supporting factor for one to sort of amass such elaborate wealth. And the supporting factor, one of the commerce of such thing, is to sort of do these sorts of karmic uh, merit making ceremonies, where you do offer the best to the best, and in a way of developing that karma, that prasad, that preeti, that zest, that happiness that you develop through all of that. So I think also, in another way, when people see those sorts of buildings, elaborate things, there are people who find it very much, right? Find it very much within, find it very much something that arouses Shraddha within them, because when you see that the grandiose nature of where the Buddha is sort of hosted. So it is, I think, very much, it is very much within the practice of Dhamma also. If one wishes to do some sort of offerings, I think it is very much all right? It is very much all right. There was a research actually, which was done in Sri Lanka by a professor at I think Peradeniya University, as to why people, so this, I am just citing this research. I do not know how the research was done. I do not know the sort of the intricacies of how these results were, results were gained, but I do know what the finding of the results. So the study focus of the study was why Sri Lankans are attracted to austeric monks. That was research, right, done by this professor, right? And in psychology, he had found a sort of a connection to psychology in a way, that to say that because of the attachment, or because of the suffering that people usually go through in their life, we find it apparently more comforting to see other people also suffer, apparently. Now this is entirely the research, right? That we have this masochistic tendency, or sadistic urge, or not masochistic, I'm sorry, sadistic need, to sort of, or that we enjoy, or rather we are more comfortable seeing people going through equal amounts of suffering or austerity, right? Now that was a finding. So I think people look at these things in very different ways. That is my answer. I personally, if you want to offer a gold Buddha statue, go for it. If I have the money, I will also support you, right? Go for it, do it. If you want to do, if you want to, if you want to offer a luxury. Now, for example, the Power of Meditation Center that we were in, it was completely built of teak, right? Obviously not a cheap endeavor, right? But it did bring a lot of sort of, there was an ambience about the hall, right? So of course, could it have been done in a cheaper manner? Of course it could have been done in a cheaper manner. But did they choose to? No. Why? Because they had the support and the means to do that. So what, right? So what? So it is all, I would say, the Yonsu Manskara and Ayonsu Manskara that you have in your head. But there are certain offerings which, now something that I cannot personally agree with, is offering of large amounts of fruits and vegetables and all of these things to the pagodas, right? And if it was offered, I would be very happy if they were sort of offered to charity afterwards, or at least used to feed the homeless and the poor, especially in a developing country like Sri Lanka. So moving on now, Samantha has something to say to us, I think. Why did the Thai tradition, I believe, now if you want to speak, please, now we can use the mics, because we are done with the sutta now, right? I believe following Achancha tradition went against Ajahn Brahm for supporting a Bhikkhuni monastery. The thought, Dhamma does not discriminate in all consciousness. Samantha is on fire today. Where is Samantha?
Yeah, Yes, Bhante. I mean, it just seems like
Yeah.
I was going to say, even in Buddha's time, I presume out of compassion,
Yeah.
Buddha didn't teach the nuns
Yeah.
because of their safety, and
Yeah.
it was Venerable Ananda, I understand, that pleaded with the Buddha to teach the nuns,
Yeah,
etc.
absolutely.
And also in this sort of tradition, even in today's days as well, the Thai, I think it's Ajahn Brahm was a Thai tradition, isn't it? Ajahn Chah's. He was reprimanded for sort of like doing these things for the Bhikkhunis.
Yeah.
So I couldn't understand pure Dhamma, why followers of pure Dhamma teachings, why that
Absolutely.
would be.
I think now people like Dill might be knowing more about this whole thing because she's connected to Amaravati and the Thai tradition more than I am. But what I know of the whole thing was that it was more to do with, Ajahn Brahm, whether Ajahn Brahm had the right to make such a call whilst he was living under the patronage of certain bhikkhus, like for example Achan Sumedho or Achan, I think, what is Dil, what is the name of Wat Pa Pong abbot? Was it Achan Achan I can't remember. So, the Wat Pa Pong and Wat Pa Nanachat, the main centers in, so Ajahn Brahm was very much under these Mahanayak or high theras, and he made a call on his own. This sort of the call that the Achan Chah tradition made against Ajahn Brahm seems to be more connected to that. Also, I would say, although we do not know most of the things that goes on within these sort of high-ranking monks, I would say, of course, there was, like in the Buddha's time, there was backlash. Surely there was backlash because this was it was a novel decision. It was not a decision that was thought about and people were talking. It was a decision which was new to its kind, and people were not clear how to take it. Dil, do you want to comment very briefly?
I think in the tradition they're very respectful of their preceptors and the tradition they are, and going against that, even though in the current circumstance and in the current times that women do practically everything that men do, and there is no reason to think that they are any lesser in terms of realizing the fruits of the path, that there isn't, and that they should be encouraged. Ajahn Sumedho, particularly, he's very reverential to Ajahn Chah, and the in in Thailand they're very very particular about the fact that that was the tradition that Ajahn Mang and Ajahn Tha and even the Ajahn Liam, all the
Yeah,
current abbot is
yeah,
Ajahn Liam, that they, so they would, so when this came about, I know they were very, it caused it almost like a storm, and all the monks got together, and there were there were emails and there were phone calls going all over what they were going to do. And I think then they decided that they would never, even not that they thought that women can't and they shouldn't be supported, but they looked to Thailand, and the directions they got from Thailand was that in Thailand and in the hierarchy that they were trained in, that this was definitely not acceptable, and therefore it's not their personal view. They would never go against their teacher. So that was the reason why Ajahn Sumedha took that. And I mean, it was very sad because after that, between Ajahn Brahm's monastery and Ajahn Amaravati, there's a big schism. So I mean, he never comes to comes here, and I don't think there's any kind of things, because it's just that he decided on his own that it was more important in the current day to give the nuns what they wanted than stick to hierarchical, respect and obedience. It's just that it was not because it was right or wrong. It's just that Ajahn Sumedho is very reverential, and he's older.
Very much. It is, I think, with the Thai tradition and having lived at, having been at Amaravati for not Amaravati, Wat Pa Nanachat for a little time. I think they are very I think they are very sort of rigid with the fact of respect and sort of the hierarchy within the Thai tradition, and I think that is what sort of got Ajahn Brahm into sort of hot water with these monks. But let us move on. Thank you, Dale. Thank you very much for that. And
Thank you.
yes, and with Don, you wanted to ask something?
I, of course, also know Amaravati a little bit. Well, the critical element, of course, is to recognize the fact that Ajahn Brahm went against the tide, against all odds. And now the important thing is that that ordinations are carried out in Western Australia, and that there are many strides done by his monastery in different parts of the world. Sometimes there is a need to go the against all odds when you are faced with situations like this in order to change the culture. But one thing that still makes me very uncomfortable when I go to Amaravati is during the dana time, when the monks go to get the food first and then the nuns follow afterwards. That is something that makes me extremely uncomfortable. And is there any way that we could take action, you could take action, and all others concerned with Amaravati take action to change this very bad, disrespectful etiquette, which is not in the suttas?
Well, really, Don, it is actually in the suttas, right?
Is it?
Yes, it is. It is.
Which particular one is it, sir?
Because the seniority, first of all, the Ashtagaru Dhamma, which are the 8 cardinal precepts, it's there, right? First, write that there. But I think there is also a practical problem, right? Which actually the monks were, because when this Achambram thing happened, I was very much in the forest tradition and living in the forest. So there were a lot of sort of discussion going on even in Burma as to what we are going to do, what is going to happen. And of course, because within the sort of monastery, because we are dealing with hindrances here, right? And the monastery, whilst we have a sister-brother relationship between the nunnery and the nuns and the monks, we also do keep our distance because, of course, they're females, right? And we are males, right? And we live and we are able to sort of walk up and down now from the males. So we are able to, and we do have actually every day after at 5 o'clock during our break time up until 7 o'clock. We do sort of go on a long walk, which usually we will go down to the nuns' monastery, turn back and come back up again, right? So it's a sort of like a 4-kilometer walk, right? And we usually do that, right? So the separation must be clear, right? To not allow for lust to arise. And also, Don, now think about this practical issue. Now some of you might think that this is inappropriate for me to say, but I have to say it, right? Now let's say, there are monks and nuns mixed and they're standing. Now usually monks, when they go on Pindapada, they must look down, right? Now usually if I am looking down, right, there is also angle to which you look where you can meditate, you will not hurt your neck and all of that. That angle down, now if a monk is in front of me, my eyes are towards the buttocks area of the monk, right? Now even problems such as that, now that is a very, very practical problem there, right? And now if you're walking, mixed with the monks and the nuns, right, it would to someone, of course, to the monk itself, there could be lust that arises, and even to someone who is looking from, or someone who is taking a picture or something like that. Remember when this gentleman with Obama, right, he had sort of, when he got distracted and looked to a side, the camera, it looked as if this gentleman, this politician, was looking at the breasts of this lady standing next to Obama, and it became a whole thing, right? Just imagine that sort of. So there are practical issues that sort of comes into these sorts of things. But of course, within the textures, within the scriptures, there are certain rules of this sort, right? There are rules of this sort, and how the modern world is going to deal with it, I am not I am not going to, I do not know how to comment on that. There are more senior bhikkhus than I who have to comment on that. But with regards to even the Acham Ram's decision to take this decision, I know that in Australia, there were times that Acham Ram had spoken to his confidants where he had in certain times regretted, because after Acham Ram's sort of initiation of the Bhikkhuni ordination, there are a lot of Bhikkhunis who broke a part of that and made their own with their own views and practices. So this is an issue not about males and females, but rather the Western thinking and how that affects the sort of the practice that we have in the East, because the cultures that both these classes of people come from are completely different from one another, right? Sometimes it could also take turns into becoming cultural appropriation in a way, right, where we take something out of the Eastern culture. And of course, because these are ancient, not old, ancient practices, right? Ancient practices, breaking up or stirring up the framework, of course, would mean that there would be many things to sort of change following those decisions that are taken, right? That is what I personally think. But I am not going to sort of say this should be done, because I think there are other monks who understand this whole game so much so better than I do in terms of these kinds of conflict, these kinds of problems. I know for a fact, though, in Naoena, when I was living in Naoena, they did close the monastery to all local ordinations happening in the monastery, because because obviously there were a lot of ladies who came from, I would say, uneducated backgrounds, who did not have the patience necessary to sort of cope with the different obstacles that would arise through living with people. So I remember there was even a fight where they fought with potatoes. Which I find completely hilarious. But there was a fight such as that, because a certain nun wanted some potatoes and the other nun was making curry. Not to say that all women or nuns are like that, but the monastery, they made a decision to close the monastery to Dhammika Ashrama. They say the Dhammika Ashram, they closed it to any local ordinations, and they only accepted foreign nuns coming in from Taiwan and all these places to live there, to protect the sanity and to protect the practice, that to protect the place as a place of practice, right? So because because we have to deal with people coming from with all levels of shraddha, all levels of education, different class, it's a very, very, very difficult task, right? It's a very,
But
very
Bhante, excuse me for interrupting you,
yes.
sir, but schisms happened also during Buddha's time.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it was a difficult task even during the Buddha's time. There were
Yeah.
so many issues that arose, even between the monks and the monks, nuns and the nuns, monks and the nuns, monks and the lay people, nuns and the lay people, lay people and the lay people. There were so many problems. Managing these issues are so complicated, and also the decision makers being in a place to sort of make a decision to protect the teachings and the practice held within the teachings, and to also protect the views and the patterns of thinking of the world at the moment is a very challenging, very, very challenging thing. So I don't think, yes, Dil, of course you can say something.
The thing is, even though I'm a woman, and there are lots of, as you say, Bhante, practical issues.
Yeah.
We have seen this in the years that we are associated. In fact, the reason why Ajahn Sumedho retired prematurely was exactly because of this gender issue, which we know, which was one of the saddest things that happened there. And the most senior nuns who have been with Ajahn Sumedho from the time he first came here, like Ajahn Sundara as well as Ajahn Chandasiri, they're Scottish and they're French, right? They were much milder, because when you become a nun, and when you have Patipadan, when you go forth, you take some vows where you say that, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 8 vows, and one of the vows is that you will always be second to a fully ordained Upasampada monk, and it's a vow which they take in that in their Pabaja ceremony, right? So having taken that vow, then later on when we had the whole gender issue, I can't remember, 10 years ago, before Ajahn Amaro came in, the younger nuns, because they were all Western, and because the rule of the country in England is their gender equality, they felt that it was wrong that a junior uh, younger monk who was ordained recently should, at a meeting, his decision should be taken over a 10 preceptor nun who was there. So over this, it became such a, they opened website and there was slander record. It was so, and Ajahn Sumedho just felt that he had had enough, and he retired and left. And for many years we didn't have it, because he didn't want to get involved in fighting. And these
Okay, so
Western
the nuns issue was a predominant issue that made Ajahn Sumedho leave.
Yes, that
So,
was the issue, because it became so ugly, and he was so gentle, and he didn't want to get involved in the fight. And it was not the senior nuns; it was all the junior young nuns. And isn't it funny that now there are so many nuns going forth, but they're all Asian Eastern nuns, except for one or two. I'm not saying all, but 80% of them are there, because I think Western people find it very difficult to accept that and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I think if they come to Amaravati, that is what it is. But all those who have come now, there are Korean nuns, Sri Lankan people, there are so many people who have gone from Thailand, and all of them are quite comfortable with that, right? Because I think in their own countries, I mean in Sri Lanka, the those people are treated really badly. Even in London Buddhist Vihara, before the current year, when the nuns used to come, they were not even allowed to sit on the stage. They were all seated down with us, right? So in our Asian countries, the treatment of the women, I mean, Amaravati is so much better. And now at least the nuns are allowed to go before the Samanera monks, and before the Samanera. Originally, they had to wait till everybody goes, and even so, it had improved. And I think it is a real Ajahn Amaro's credit that when it was Ajahn Chah's 100th birth anniversary, and he gave a place to every single nun. There were 9 nuns then. If all the 9, there were 10. One nun didn't want to go, saying that she didn't like the snakes, and then all the 9 nuns, only very few monks were all taken. And in fact, he gave me also a place to go. So I was very lucky to accompany Sudanta and all, who were really the Sangha, the main people who were there. But we got opportunity of going. And in fact, all the Thai people said, and all the other monks, Western monks, that he was very courageous to take them, because the Thai people just didn't accept the nuns.
Mm-hmm.
They were not even allowed to eat. I mean, there were these huge ceremonies, and the nuns were treated like with us. They were not even allowed to go, because that's how in Thailand they treat the nuns, right? So our nuns who are in Amaravati, the fact is now Sudanta and them always consider their dishes. In fact, there are equal numbers of nuns and monks in the senior committee, and I mean they take equal responsibility for all decisions taken now, and that is all credit to Ajahn Amaro. So I think it's a very difficult issue because of the way that the Buddha has reacted.
Absolutely. I think it's a very difficult issue as well. But although I really believe that women should be given, and I think even in now we were closed down the temples are closed down for Corona, because of Corona. But even with now, even with little things that really do not matter. For example, let us say the dhatu casket, the relic casket held by which holds the relics of the Buddha, are not allowed to be carried by a lady. Right now, I think I'm going to be the first monk in the UK to get a lady to carry it. Right, because I think it's completely nonsense, for God's sakes. Come on, Mala, you have to come carry the casket sometime, huh? Right. So I think it's completely nonsense, complete BS, I think, really. Because look, who took the tooth relic to Sri Lanka? Huh? A woman. Because of whom do we have the Abhidhamma? Because of a woman and the act of a woman. Because of whom did the Bhikkhuni Sasana get established? Because of the Buddha's stepmother, a woman, right? Because of whom did was the Buddha born? Because of a woman. From whose blood was the Buddha's flesh made? By a woman. Right? Yes, the fact of lust is very important, but I think we also have to realize we don't talk about the fact. What about the fact of lust within the sex of males, within the sex of females, right? What about those things? Why is it that the Theravada Buddhist world does not address these things? We talk about lust-based issues that could happen between the monks and the nuns. What about the monks and the monks and the nuns and the nuns? Right? These are very much, I think, topics that needs to come out, because the more that it is sort of hidden and sort of put away and sort of all of that, the more that it festers and hurts people. Right? So these are very much topics, I think, that should be discussed and put out and be I think. But of course, because I am the head of the Dhamma Center, I am surely going to give the Dhatu relic casket to a woman and get it and put a photo up on Facebook for all the monks to start bickering about me. But love the attention. Someone once said, any publicity is good publicity. Right? And I think things like that should stop. Right? Things like that, which are completely rootless. At least in terms of the cardinal precepts, there is a footing to say, okay, this is an issue that one person cannot, because the cardinal precepts are very much something which is in the Tipitaka, within the Dhamma, right? Carrying the relic casket, or a lady not allowed on top of the Jayasri Maha Bodhiya, not allowed into the main chamber of, where the relics are. Now these things are complete garbage, right? This is just culture, and these are just ways that the cultural Asian world sort of holds down and puts down women, and I think that needs to stop. That needs to absolutely stop. The problems with the Tripitaka and all of that, let the senior monks handle it. If Acharya Sumedho had to leave, resign from his position because he was unable to handle it, I am surely not going to comment about any of that. I'm going to palm it off on the senior monks, right? Let them handle it. But of course, in my little way, for the little person that I am, with the little center that I have, of course, I am very much into sort of creating that change and breaking from this nonsense that we have chosen to live with for so many years, right?
One thing he didn't, God sake, don't say that he had to resign. He
okay.
retired of his own, because
yes,
like there was so much of displaced, the communities got split, and some of the very senior female directors, white, they gave up their positions, and they were, so he didn't think that there should be peace and harmony, and he thought he had done enough, and so he on his own went. So he never resigned because of it. Never say that he didn't.
I don't know much about it.
Yeah, so don't talk like that. We have a lot of regard.
So anyways, so thank you very much for signing in. We've very much gone beyond our time, right? Thank you very much for signing in. I will see you again tomorrow or day after. Tomorrow is the Abhidhamma, day after is the sutras. All of our talks are available online on the Dhamma Center website, on the Dhamma Center YouTube page, as well as the links to it are all available on our Dhamma Center web page. So thank you very much. Have a pleasant rest of the evening, and take care, all of you. And I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.